Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Truth and Liberty. The government shutdown, who's to blame, and what are we going to do to keep this from happening again? Well, on this week's episode of Truth and Liberty, our special guest is going to be one of the members of Congress who was elected in 2024 for the first time. Congressman Jeff Crank from Colorado Springs is going to be joining us. We're excited to have him, and we're going to be diving into this whole subject of the government shutdown. How did it happen, and what's it all about? The federal budget was authorized in the one big beautiful bill, or it may not have been a budget bill, it was actually a reconciliation bill. But important questions were resolved in that act that was passed just a few weeks back, just a few months ago, including the very issues that the Democrats are wanting to reverse now by holding what's called a continuing resolution hostage through the filibuster. And meanwhile, our military service members are going without pay, hundreds of thousands of federal workers, and so on. But I want to talk today about the fact that the government shutdown is only possible because of a Senate rule. The Senate rule we often call the filibuster. It's more accurately called the cloture rule. Under this rule of the United States Senate, it takes 60 votes to end debate on a bill. So even if there's a clear majority like 59 or 58 senators that support a bill, a minority of 40 senators or 41 can block that bill, stop it from passing because it takes 60 votes under this strange rule of the United States Senate requiring a supermajority to end quote unquote debate. Now, don't have it in your mind that ending debate means you're stopping senators from talking. No, that's not what we're talking about anymore. That's old days. That's like the classic, Mr. Smith goes to Washington scenario. What we're talking about here is a yes vote on ending debate. That's all it is. And so under this strange rule, the party in minority is able to block the will of the American people as expressed through their representatives. And it's a real problem. The more divided America has become, the more important, and really in a bad way, the more powerful the filibuster rule or the cloture rule has become. Originally, the U.S. Senate had no such rule. Under its original rules at the time of our founding, a simple majority vote would end the debate on a bill. In 1806, however, the United States Senate repealed that rule because Aaron Burr said it wasn't necessary. Why do we have to have a rule on the number of votes needed to end debate? The end result, however, was that there was no rule that allowed for the shutting down of debate, and senators could debate as so long as they could hold the floor. And so debate would be dragged on and on and on. And this practice is what became known as the filibuster. In 1917, the Senate adopted the cloture rule. It's rule number 22, and it allows for a motion to be filed to end debate. But at that time, they required a 2/3 majority to pass. It was later amended to allow 60 votes to pass. So we have this cloture rule in the U.S. Senate that allows for an artificial obstruction, not real debate going on, an artificial obstruction of legislation. And it's a real problem and has given the minority in the U.S. Senate the power to block legislation and appointments and all kinds of things. Now, the Senate has addressed this in piecemeal by creating all sorts of exceptions to the cloture rule, including the following. In 2013, Democrats changed the Senate rule to enable the confirmation of executive branch appointments, including the cabinet, without making the cloture rule not apply to that. Also of non-Supreme Court judicial appointments with a simple majority. 4 years later, Senate Republicans expanded the change to include Supreme Court appointments. So now the cloture rule doesn't apply to any judicial nominations. Votes to overcome the cloture rule, you might have heard them referred to as the nuclear option. In other words, they say, should we invoke the nuclear option, which means change or eliminate the filibuster, actually the cloture rule. Oh, that's nuclear. It's because they're so scared of what it might do if we didn't have this artificial rule in there. But they've also crafted exceptions for lots of other things, like Congress's annual budget reconciliation bill. The one big beautiful bill, that was a congressional budget reconciliation bill. And the reason it didn't get blocked was because we didn't have the cloture rule. So the Republicans who are in control were able to get it passed. Trade agreements that are under a fast-track rule, those aren't subject to cloture. Measures that involve military base closures or arms sales, for some reason, somehow along the way, those got accepted from the cloture rule. In total, there's over 160 exceptions to the cloture rule since 1969. That's according to an analysis done by the Brookings Institution. So it's idealistic, guardians of democracy kind of idea. Oh, we don't want to end debate. We need to hear every single idea that someone might have or objection and allow it, and lots of thought and all of this sort of thing to go into before we enact something into law. And you know what? I agree with that. But this rule is not that. It used to be when there was a senator could debate as long as he could hold the floor, but that's not what we're doing now. The cloture rule allows an artificial obstruction to the will of the majority. It's not really about debate anymore. It's procedural tricks is what it is. So the rule is undemocratic. And it's un-Republican. It perverts the will of the people, and it needs to be abolished, right? So our founding fathers, they didn't impose any such rule. And it's not like they didn't consider it either, because the Constitution contains supermajority threshold votes on certain areas. So they understood that, hey, we could require a supermajority to pass a bill, but they purposefully did not do that. And so, for example, it takes a two-thirds vote to amend the Constitution. It takes a three-fourths vote to amend the Constitution, two-thirds to convict for impeachment. So we know the founders understood the concept and that they could have imposed that. So this whole Senate rule called the cloture rule, it's against the Constitution and it needs to be eliminated. Now, in the current shutdown situation, the Democrats under Chuck Schumer are refusing to allow a vote under this cloture rule. They're refusing to allow the Senate to vote on a clean spending bill. By clean, we mean it's just a bill to continue current funding levels for the government operations that have already been approved. And so they're wanting to inject into this spending measure new policy changes and new requirements. There are 13 such bills that have been proposed by the Republicans coming out of the House. So 13 different times they've said, here's a clean bill, here's a clean bill, here's a clean bill. Every time the Dems in the Senate, through the cloture bill, are blocking it and won't let it pass. And so what are the issues they're wanting to inject into this bill? Well, one of them is paying Medicare benefits to illegal aliens, right? You might remember this came up in the one big beautiful bill that did pass. We decided, as through our elected representatives, we're not going to spend our tax dollars to pay for health care for people that are in our country illegally. Common sense, if you ask me. Well, the Democrats who want to curry favor with hardcore leftists who don't respect the rule of law, who want to, they're clinging on to the hope that illegals will someday become voting citizens, or else they are allowing them to vote anyway, one of the two. Plus, they inflate the census numbers in blue areas, which allow them to have more representation in Congress. So they want health care for illegals on your dollar, right? And they want that put into this bill, and they've shut the government down because of it. Well, the other issue is they want you, taxpayers, to pay part of the insurance premium for people who choose insurance under Obamacare, under the public marketplace kind of thing, right, that Obama got passed. Well, those premiums are sky high, which we predicted back when Obamacare is being voted on. And now people they say they need federal handouts in order to afford the premiums under a system that the liberals created in the first place. And so now they want to tax you to pay for those, and they want to inject that into this bill. It's called a premium supplement for premium, I don't know, whatever, something like that related to Obamacare. Jeff Crank's going to explain all this to us. Well, folks, all of this kind of goes to a bigger question, which is the state of our economy. And we're going to be talking to Congressman Crank about this as well. Things are good, but they're not great right now. We had the second quarter, the U.S. economy grew at an annual rate of 3.8%, which is actually phenomenal. That is awesome. Our current inflation rate in July was 2.9%, which was slightly up from the previous month, or 2.9 in August, up from 2.7 in July, so a slight uptick. Unemployment's at about 4.3%, which is an historic low, but we have more and more people who are pulling themselves out of the job market. The stock market is up, the S&P 500, 13% since Donald Trump took office. The Federal Reserve is finally inching down interest rates. Another quarter point was dropped the last time they met, just last month. But Americans remain sort of negative about the overall economy. But I think this is going to change. The situation we're in is this. Donald Trump is using tariffs in order to equal the playing field for our trade as a nation, because for years and years and years, our leaders have refused to do this, and they've allowed other nations around the world to steal from us, literally, where we pay tariffs out the nose in every country around the world, but we don't charge any tariffs here. We believe in free trade, but no one else does, and we stand up saying free trade, but we pay for it. Well, Trump is changing all that, and he's getting some deals done, some good deals for America. They're not coming to pass as quickly as we want, but they are coming. In the meanwhile, it does have an inflationary effect to it, because it's the consumers here that pay the tariffs that are charged to goods that come from overseas, and so it does cause a little bit of inflation. But the other thing is the Federal Reserve lowering interest rates enough? If they keep lowering them, will it cause inflation to go higher? And is it causing a slowdown in the economy? And it certainly, absolutely can't be argued that it is in housing and construction, because people can't even afford to buy a house now because of the mortgage rates, and they can't afford to buy a new home and so on. But also, what about this? We have a $7 trillion federal budget. Think about that, 6.4, $7 trillion that our government spends. That's just the federal government every year. Did you know 61% of that is on social programs? 72% on our social programs plus our national debt. I suspect that this amount of money being injected into the economy every single year artificially is definitely causing inflation. And you know, there's a temporary side effect probably of the immigration crackdown, because low wage earners are leaving the country either voluntarily or through deportation, and they're also not coming into the country as much. So that's a pressure on wages, but it's not a bad thing, because what that means is it's going to cause the wages of all Americans who are here legally to go up. And it will have some inflationary effect in the short run, but eventually it should equalize. These are costs we're paying now, but if we can bite the bullet and hold on, these things are going to get better. I believe there will be a big payoff in the future. So there's no question that we need to pursue these policies. Another thing, though, that's super important, and I've become under the conviction we need to start talking about this now and continue talking about it until something changes. But right now in Washington, the Federal Food and Drug Administration has relaxed regulations governing the abortion pill. It used to be, and it is still the law in America under the Comstock Act, that you cannot ship abortion drugs through the U.S. mail, right? It's illegal. Plus, we have a regulation, we used to have one that said that the abortion pill can only be administered under a doctor's supervision. Joe Biden did away with all that in the name of quote-unquote women's health care. It should be called infant murder care, really is what it is. And Donald Trump so far has refused to rescind that. RFK Jr. has refused to do anything about it. In fact, they just approved a new generic abortion drug. This needs to change, folks. The majority of intra-womb murder, right? That's what it is, in America today is coming from the ingestion of the abortion pill. Babies, human remains, are being flushed down the toilets all over America, hundreds of thousands of them a year. And those drugs, which are hormone-altering drugs, are being polluting our water supply. They are not filtered out by our water treatment facilities. How could they filter out human remains anyway, right? And this is unspeakable. It's horrific, and it needs to stop. Well, I'm really excited to have on the show today Congressman Jeff Crank, freshman congressman from Colorado Springs, but a longtime political activist, talk show host, and a great guy, a business leader. And we're going to be talking about all these things and more in what is really one of the most enjoyable interviews I've had in quite some time. So don't go away. We're going to share an announcement with you, and we'll be right back with an amazing interview with Congressman Jeff Crank. Are you passionate about standing for truth in the culture, but don't know how to get started? Well, Truth and Liberty, our mission is to educate, unify, and mobilize the body of Christ to stand for truth in the public square. And as part of our mission, we provide you with an amazing array of resources on our website. And our website has just been revamped, remodeled, and retooled to be user-friendly. And I'm so excited about it because I believe that there's nothing like it out there anywhere. I want to encourage you today to go to truthandliberty.net and check out the Resources Center and the Get Equipped Center. On our Resources Center, you will find hundreds of links, hundreds of videos, articles, blogs, even America's original founding documents can be found on Truth and Liberty's Resources Center. It's searchable by topic, preset topic, or you can put in a custom search to find exactly what you need and what you're interested in. In the Get Equipped section, we link you to tools created by our strategic partners, including Pray, Vote, and Engage tools. We culture impact teams, civic action teams, biblical citizenship in modern America, biblical worldview training, and more. So go today to truthandliberty.net and find what you need to get equipped to stand for truth in the public square. Welcome back to the Truth and Liberty Show. As I mentioned, our special guest today is Congressman Jeff Crank. Congressman Crank represents the 5th District of Colorado, which is kind of our backyard here at Truth and Liberty, and we are just super honored to have him joining us today. Congressman, thank you for coming on the show.
Richard, thanks, and I adopt you as I'll be your congressman. How does that sound?
That sounds great. You're a whole lot better than the one we actually have. But we used to be in the 5th District, and then those Democrats in Denver redrew the lines on us. So, you know, we'll be a thorn in Brittany Pedersen's side. How's that sound?
It sounds good.
No, with all love and respect to her. Listen, it's been a year since the 2024 election, when you were elected to Congress, when Donald Trump was elected back as President of the United States. I can't believe it's only been a year. It feels like so much longer, doesn't it?
It sure does. If you think back on all of that's happened in this last year, and you know, really, if you think the president, it's only been 10 months essentially that the president's been president of the United States, 9.5 months. So it's pretty staggering what he has been able to accomplish and what Congress has been able to accomplish here over the last many months. You know, to get elected to Congress is a dream come true for me. But to be elected at this time when we've been so productive, it's exceeded all expectations.
Oh, that's so good to hear. So, you know, when we think back about the legislative session here, the congressional session, really pretty much the only bill that we heard much news about was the One Big Beautiful bill, but I guess there have been others. I know there have been, but tell us about the One Big Beautiful bill, Congressman, if you don't mind. I know you voted for it. There was a bit of controversy as they tried to say that it was going to increase the federal deficit. Why did you support that bill?
Yeah, well, thanks, Richard. Yeah, you know, the One Big Beautiful bill, it is the signature thing that we got done in this session. But you know what? I've told folks it's the most significant thing I think Congress has done in generations, really. It really realigned America in many ways, from tax policy to, you know, our energy policy, to so many other things, to you know, Medicaid and how we treat Medicaid. All of those things were changed in this. If you think about what could have happened, we were facing a $4.5 trillion tax increase if we were not able to extend the tax cuts. But we did even better than that. We didn't just extend the existing tax cuts from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from the President Trump's first term, but we were able to add several new provisions which really help working families. And, I know people have called it the One Big Beautiful Bill. I like to call it the Working Families Tax Cut Act because that's truly what it was. No tax on overtime, no tax on tips, a senior tax exemption. Um, a doubling of the child tax credit for working families, and a doubling of the standard deduction. These are things that every single American is going to have it impact them in a very positive way. This is all retroactive to January 1st of 2025, so they're going to feel it immediately when they file their taxes in 2026. So it was just a great signature piece of legislation for us.
Well, I just want to say thank you. I'm excited about those tax breaks for sure. And comment if you would about Medicaid, Congressman. The press was saying without really challenge or explanation or anything that he's cutting Medicaid. He's cutting Medicaid, and all the horror stories of people are going to lose their access to health care. But that's really not what was going on. There were cuts to Medicaid, but it was by virtue of doing some reforms that needed to happen. Am I right about that?
You're exactly right, Richard. And, the hysteria never stopped and it's still going. I mean, there are still people who are out there peddling the lie that somehow we were cutting benefits. I had folks coming up to me saying, I have a daughter or a son on that's disabled who's going to get their Medicaid cut. That's just not true. And people, it's kind of shameful if you think about it. People taking people who are pretty vulnerable, right? Who have a disabled child and kind of almost using them as a political pawn in this political game that they're playing. We did some simple things. Medicaid was designed for the indigent and for the disabled. That's who it's for. And over the years, particularly since the Affordable Care Act was passed, there has
Obamacare.
been this desire, yeah, Obamacare. There's been this desire on part of the left to increase the number of people on Medicaid because they couldn't get a single payer healthcare government sponsored healthcare plan passed. So they just decided to move more people onto Medicaid. And so we've seen the Medicaid rolls grow and grow. And so what we did in this bill was we very simply put work requirements for able-bodied adults who are between the ages of 18 and 64 to be able to work. If you and those work requirements are very simple: 20 hours a week of work. It can also include 20 hours of going to school or 20 hours of volunteer time. And if you do those, you still qualify to get your Medicaid benefits. And it does not apply to you if you have children, if you're caring for children, if you're the caregiver to a parent. Those work requirements don't even apply to you. So this was really intended to get able-bodied people back into the workforce, and we desperately need that in the United States.
Well, and the original bill had a new rule that illegal aliens would not be eligible for Medicaid. Did that survive through to passage?
It did. It did. And, and that is the attempt. And in fact, as we talk about the shutdown, that's one of the things that many on the left, on the Democrat side, wanted to strike those provisions, those healthcare provisions out of the One Big Beautiful Bill, including all of those Medicaid reforms, including the prohibition on money being spent on illegal aliens in the United States. And so, to us, it just makes sense. If we're going to have health care, we need to provide for the citizens of the United States before we provide for the rest of the world.
Congressman, do Democrats sort of have a problem realizing that the money they're spending is coming out of the pockets of hardworking Americans, that they're literally taking your earnings, John Q. Public, and giving it to an illegal?
Well, and as if it's an endless pot.
Right.
That's what's so frustrating about this, right? We're $37 trillion in debt, and we certainly can talk about the issue of debt, but it's not an endless amount of money here. We are, people around state and local governments think that the federal government is the cash cow, that they can come to the federal government. We're the ones $37 trillion in debt. So we can't continue to do that. And yes, they do think on the left, they do believe that they can reach into our pockets and continue to take money out of that hard-earned money out of our wallets and use it for other things like healthcare for illegals, and they don't seem to be bothered by that at all.
Well, and we want to talk about the shutdown, but before we get into that, the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, had
Yeah.
sort of another sky is falling prediction. Said that the one big beautiful bill is going to increase the federal deficit by what, 2.5 trillion or something like that,
Right.
over 10 years. Did you find that credible at the time? I mean, they're supposed to be nonpartisan, but were there things they weren't taking into account?
The CBO has lost all credibility with me. In fact, I believe we ought to score. We ought to have a completely different system than CBO. I've actually called for us getting rid of a government office like the CBO, which, by the way, the majority of the people, the economists who are there, are Democrats. They always seem to score Democrat bills more favorably than they do Republican bills. I'm for maybe going out and getting a company like Ernst and Young, or maybe getting a couple of different accounting firms that would actually score these things for us. The Congress could hire them as a contractor. They'll do a better job. If you look at the CBO, they were wrong on the Inflation Reduction Act. They said that that would actually reduce the deficit, and it increased it by $300 billion. And then on the original tax cuts, on the Trump tax cuts from his first term, the CBO said that it was going to increase the deficit by $500 billion, and they were off by $500 billion, $500 billion.
Yeah.
They were off on. They are terrible at estimating any of this. I actually have a bill that I am co-sponsor of where we ask the CBO to show us your work. If you're going to give us a number, like just like math class,
Yeah.
right? The teacher asked you to show the work. Show us the work. How are you getting to this? They won't show us the work right now, and Congress shouldn't rely on them until they do.
Well, absolutely. So, well, okay. So right now, everybody knows we're in a shutdown mode. Government is shut down. Can you just tell us what is going on? How did this happen? What's it all about? Why can't we get a spending bill passed?
Yeah. Well, for years we have had this standard in Washington D.C. that we do a clean continuing resolution. I would liken it to when you run to the end of a lease on a apartment, that you extend the lease. You basically say, "Hey, we're going to keep it at the same rate. You keep paying utilities, whatever was in the previous lease, you just keep that going." And that's what a clean CR does. It just allows us to have more time. The Democrats 13 times voted for that in the Biden administration, and Republicans went along with it in a bipartisan way. For whatever reason, the Democrats wanted to bring us to the brink here. And I believe the reason is they wanted to pander to their radical base. They were worried about Mamdani, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, possibly primarying Chuck Schumer in his Senate seat in New York. And so they're afraid of those folks. So they wanted to show that they were fighting the president. They just months ago supported this very same clean CR and voted for it because they wanted to avoid a shutdown. But for whatever reason, they decided to push it this time. It's very simple. The Republicans, 99% of the Republicans in the House of Representatives voted to keep the government open. That clean CR went over to the Senate, and 99% of the Republicans in the Senate voted to keep the government open. But 14 times now, the U.S. Senate has not uh, passed that bill. And what's happening is they're filibustering it. It needs to get 60 votes. We have 55, as many as 55 votes that have voted for it over the last month and a little over 5 weeks, I guess. And we can't get to that 60 because we need 5 Democrats to come to their senses and pass this and pay our soldiers, pay our men and women who are fighting to keep us safe in the skies, our air traffic controllers, our TSA agents, and so many others. It's really a shame that it's gotten to this point. I'm hopeful that it will end very soon.
So, what are they fighting over? What are they wanting to do to the funding resolution, the CR,
Yeah.
that Republicans are unwilling to let them do?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what day it is, Richard, to find out what they're trying to do on it. When they first had this first fight, they filed a separate CR. They filed a different CR, the Democrats in the Senate did. And what that bill did is it repealed all of the health care provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill, including all of the Medicaid reforms that we had, the work requirements, the prohibition on funding illegal aliens, all of that. They wanted that repealed. And that's why we've made that the talking point, right? That's what they wanted to do. Now they found out pretty quickly that that wasn't very popular, so they quickly pivoted, and to them it became about these enhanced premium tax credits that are intended to prop up Obamacare. The problem with those tax credits, and look, we have to do something about healthcare. It's a broken system, and by the way, the system we have is Obamacare. That's what's broken. So we shouldn't prop up a broken system. We should fix a broken system. The enhanced premium tax credits, Richard, and many people aren't aware of this. What we're talking about are tax credits for people who buy their health care on the exchange, but who, for a family of four that makes over $128,000 a year. If you make less than $128,000 a year as a family of four, you don't qualify for the enhanced premium tax credits. You qualify for the premium tax credits. Those aren't going away. So, this whole fight for the Democrats, if it's about enhanced premium tax credits, is about trying to provide government subsidized health care for a family of four that makes over $128,000 a year. That's crazy. We need to fix health care, but we need to fix the broken system instead of just subsidizing it with more government money.
Wow. So what we're talking about here is a government subsidy for health insurance for people, families that make over $128,000 a year. They've shut the government down over this.
Yes, yes. If you hear what their stated goals are. Now again, originally it was they wanted all the provisions removed on Medicaid reform and all of that. But now they've narrowed it down to really talking about this enhanced premium tax credit. But the unstated goal is to placate the crazy base of the left wing base of the Democrats so that they're standing up to Donald Trump because that's ultimately to them that's what this is all about.
Well, and so meanwhile, though, what are our men and women in uniform doing? Are they suffering a furlough situation here, and all the other
Yeah.
federal workers and so on?
Well, they are, and that's really the tragedy of it, Richard, is the stress that's caused. I mean, certainly to our military, but not just our military. Civilian employees who've gone now. Some of them have gone for two pay periods without a paycheck. Whether again, and I've mentioned our ICE agents, our TSA workers, our air traffic controllers. We're getting to the point where it's going to be very, very unsafe because the Democrats want to play this game of chicken. And that's crazy. But if you think about our men and women in our military, unfortunately, President Trump has done an amazing job in finding the money. It costs about $9 billion every 2 weeks to pay the men and women on active duty in the military. That's a lot of money. And I sort of jokingly said there's not a lot of places in America you can find $9 billion in the couch cushions, but the Pentagon is one of those places. And fortunately, the president twice now has been able to find that $9 billion and pay our soldiers. I have a son in law who's stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, and he's actually deployed in Korea right now, unaccompanied. My daughter is living here in Colorado Springs, but I call him or he calls me on payday, and I say, "Okay, did you get your pay?" Because I'm checking with him to make sure that all of our military are actually getting paid. But I don't think the president can do that again. I don't think we'll be able to find that $9 billion. So people are really hurting. And, our military is one thing. And again, the president stepped up and found the money for them, but we weren't able to find the money to pay TSA agents and air traffic controllers and all of these other folks who are out there doing their job and working. And it's not right that they're being held hostage over this political battle.
Well, if you look back over the last 2 or 3 decades. This whole shutdown thing happens every so often. Usually it's just a threat, and the Republicans get weak in the knees and give in to the Democrat
Yeah.
demands, because normally the Democrats outmaneuver us in the PR game, and the Republicans end up taking a hit, looking like they're just being unreasonable, rich white people sort of mantra. What's happening this time, though? Because the latest poll I see says 42% of Americans blame the Democrats and only 23% blame Republicans. How is this one different politically?
Well, I think, first of all, a lot of credit to Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson, who, first of all, is our leader and he's our spokesperson on this. And he's just done an incredible job. The House passed this clean CR. We did it on September 19th. It seems like a lifetime ago.
Mm.
And we sent it over to the Senate and we said, we've done our job to keep the government open. It's in your lap. And we put it over there for them. There have been many people on the left who are saying, well, what about negotiating? Well, what is there to negotiate? There's nothing to negotiate. It's a clean CR. I said this to a friend the other day. If we negotiate, it's like negotiating for hostages.
Mm.
If somebody takes hostages and you negotiate with them, you're going to get more hostage taking.
Yes.
And that's the real truth on this government shutdown. If we negotiated off of a clean CR, which is the standard, um, what's going to happen in another month or two when we hit another shutdown and we pass another clean CR? They're going to have more demands. It will be a terrible situation. It will cause more government shutdowns, more hardship for the American people, more uprooting of pay for our men and women in the military and our civil servants. We can't do that. We have to stand firm.
What is the solution to the healthcare crisis? Is it more government handout, or is it the injection of free enterprise, or some combination? I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, Richard, every time we've tried to fix it, we've done the wrong thing and we've made it worse. And that's certainly what Obamacare did. The biggest problem in healthcare, in my view, is there is too much government in healthcare. Just like so many other things that we see, people have used the VA system as an example. There's a lot on the left who think, well, we ought to have more like the VA system, where we have government-run healthcare systems and people go in. I don't think, if you ask most veterans, that that's the system they want. The system they want is a system where they can get their healthcare benefits, but they can take it to a private hospital or a VA system if that's what they choose. But it should be their choice, and that's the problem. Is we've got a healthcare system that is limiting choice on the American people. There's too much government involved in it. When the government's deciding for a doctor what they will reimburse for an X-ray or for an MRI or for a knee replacement, when they're deciding, it's the government bureaucrat deciding what that's going to be for Medicaid or for Medicare, then that's too much government in it. We've got to get the free market out of that system. We've also got to have greater transparency in healthcare so that people know what they're paying. If Richard, if you had to go get an MRI tomorrow, you would probably have no idea where to go to get the cheapest MRI, even
No.
though an MRI is kind of an MRI. But you would go where whatever was in network and your healthcare plan told you to go. That's not the way to do this. There's so many reforms we can make, and we need to make them.
It's really interesting, Congressman, those things that you're mentioning. If people will go back to 2009, that's exactly what Barack Obama said would not happen. He said you'd have your choice of doctors. He said this will save you on premiums. He said, you'll have higher quality. It was all a lie, wasn't it?
It was all a lie, and that's what's so terrible about it today, is that we've got people saying we've got to have more of these subsidies, or if we don't have the subsidies, our insurance premiums are going to go up. Well, why do we even have the subsidies? We have the subsidies because the system didn't work the way that Barack Obama told us it was going to work. They lied to us. They said it was going to lower healthcare costs. It was going to make it better. It made it much worse, and the American people are paying for that. We talked about the one big beautiful bill a little bit and some of the provisions in it. We did do two great things on healthcare in the one big beautiful bill that have just kicked in. One is primary care, that you can go get direct primary care now, which is, you just cut insurance companies out all together. And you can do that pretty much in any state in the United States after the one big beautiful bill. So if you want to just go to your doctor and say, I'll pay you $200 a month or whatever, and you give me whatever health care I need for that, you can make that contract. You don't even need insurance. A lot of states wouldn't allow that in the past, but now they must because of the passage of one big beautiful bill. And then health savings accounts. Most health savings accounts, which I used to have a health savings account, I loved it in my old life, my old job, which allowed me to get that pre-tax dollar and save it for healthcare and use it as I saw fit. And I owned the account, so I used it sparingly and used it wisely. Um, that used to just be for Cadillac plans, but we changed that in the one big beautiful bill, and now many more Americans can now take advantage of an HSA. So some of those are some of the things that we can do, and much, much more to make healthcare better.
Well, thank you for all of that, Congressman. That's really enlightening. But I want to shift gears here to talk about an issue that, to me, is probably more important than probably anything else, and that's the issue of abortion. 2022 Supreme Court reverses Roe versus Wade. 50 years of advocacy and fighting and standing up for life, and yet here we are 2 years later, and we still have 1 million babies a year being aborted in this nation. And it's my understanding that the number one method is the abortion pill. That even though we have many states now that are restricting the practice, some banning it of abortion itself, drugs are under the auspices of the federal government and the Food and Drug Administration. And Joe Biden, his administration, removed the common sense rules that you can't transport abortifacients through the mail, and you have to have a doctor prescribe it in person. With those restrictions gone, we have women all over this nation aborting their babies and human remains being literally flushed down the drain. And not just that, but the chemicals in the drug are polluting our water supply. And those issues pale in comparison to the number of innocent lives that are being taken through this practice. I know that Donald Trump believes that abortion is now a state's issue, but what about the abortion pill? It seems like he's gone hands off on that. RFK Jr. is hands off on it. In fact, the FDA just approved a new generic abortion pill for public access. Do you have any thoughts on this? What can you do, Congress do? What can we, the American people, do?
Yeah, well, we regulate interstate commerce, and the Congress of the United States and the federal government that's reserved in the Constitution for us to do. And I think we ought to do everything we can to make sure that we're regulating that they're sending things in the mail that are safe to people, that we're not violating existing federal law by doing that. The whole abortion industry that's out there right now that is pushed. And of course, I live in Colorado, which is it's just tragic what's happened on the abortion issue in the state of Colorado. It's become an abortion tourist spot,
Yeah.
sadly. But there's so much that we should do, even though it was turned over to the states. Interstate commerce is interstate commerce. I do believe that we ought to step in and regulate these. And I know we've talked to the FDA about doing just that. And I hope that the Trump administration will figure out and get some will on this to do just that.
Yeah, well, we do too, and we're looking forward to seeing some movement there. I think another poll I saw, Congressman, is showing that the economy is the number one issue for people, as it often is right now, but that Americans are becoming discouraged about the economic conditions, even though there's some positive signs. GDP in the second quarter was at 3.8% of annual rate, a phenomenal growth. Inflation slightly up and some other things. But are the members of Congress, especially the Republicans, are you aware of this, concerned about it? What are your thoughts on how we can improve the economy?
Well, I think our economy is fragile. There's some things we can't control, and there's some things we can. We certainly can't control the interest rates and what the Federal Reserve does with interest rates. I think they have artificially held interest rates too high. I think they artificially held them too low during the Biden administration purposely. And I'm not happy with the way the Fed has sort of politicized, interest rates. but that's something that that the Fed will have to deal with. We don't have much control over that. But I will say, we are concerned about the economy, but we've also got to look at it from a historical standpoint and where we were under the Biden administration. They passed this so-called Inflation Reduction Act. There's never been a dumber name for a bill
I
because
agree.
it did exactly the opposite than reduce inflation. It caused inflation. It put massive amounts of money into our economy. And what happens when you do that? When you have too many dollars chasing too few goods, it causes inflation.
Hmm.
And so we should have known that that was coming. And certainly the Biden administration pushed that. A Democrat Congress, that was back when the Democrats had control of the House and the Senate. They pushed that bill through. We were powerless to stop it. But inflation went to astonishing levels, like
Yeah.
8 and 9% inflation
Hmm.
at that time. And so what's happened is with President Trump coming in, we've had to rebuild what was an economy ravaged by inflation. And we're getting control of that. You talked about GDP growth. I think that's looking strong. And inflation has held okay. It's not as great as we would want it to be, but we've beat the inflation expectation. In fact, inflation's been lower than what the expectation has been over the last couple of months for sure. And so we're doing those things. I think the bill that we passed, the one big beautiful bill, and the tax provisions in that will get this economy rolling again. And in fact, I think you're already starting to see some of that investment. I think the president has used tariffs to a good effect in one regard, and that's to get people to the table to cut better trade deals with us. And we saw that with the EU. I think we've seen it with China, where the threat of it has kind of brought them to the table. We've got a little bit of a better deal. I do not want to see tariffs long term, high tariffs. That's bad for our economy, and it will cause inflation. But I think if you use them in a way to sort of threaten countries and say, look, we're not your pansy here. We want a good trade deal, but we're not going to just let you walk all over us. And I think that's what the president's done. Those trade deals kicking in as well will be good. But we've got to be careful that those tariffs don't become a brake on economic growth as well.
You're right, and I want to ask you about something that's a sort of an economic theory of mine. But I'm wondering your thoughts on whether the crackdown on illegal immigration is part of the I don't want to say part of the problem because I think it's a good thing. But what we're seeing is low wage earners, of course, are fleeing the country, and Americans who won't work for $3 an hour, right, or whatever, who deserve more than that, are the labor force that the businesses need to turn to. Trump has sealed the border, we have hundreds of thousands of illegals leaving on their own, even plus the amount that are being deported. Do you know if businesses are now having to pay more for wages, and is that a temporary concern eventually will work itself out in the supply and demand calculations and bring our economy onto a more stable long-term growth position?
Yeah, yeah, well, I hope so, and certainly businesses do have to pay more for labor costs. Anytime you talk to businesses, they talk about the increasing cost of labor to the as an input to their product, and that's so there's no doubt that we're paying more for labor, and it's this vicious cycle, right?
Hmm.
When inflation happens, as it did at an alarming rate under the Biden administration, you need to make more money to stay up with inflation, which means you have to pay more. And that causes, when you have to pay more for labor, that causes more inflation. So it's a vicious cycle that we're having to get out of. It's an interesting point that you make on immigration, and you're right. There have been we talk about the deportations, but what is often unspoken about are the self deportations, people who have removed themselves, and there have been many of those, many more of those than there have been deportations. People who are going back and who want to still probably come to the United States and come here legally. And look, we've talked about whether for decades we've talked about we need a deal on immigration where there's some kind of deal where we get border security for some change in the immigration law. The American people said enough of that.
Hmm.
They wanted the border fixed. and the president has fixed the border. And so I think there's a unique opportunity now with the border fixed, and the deportation should continue of people who came here illegally. But I do think there's an opportunity for this president, who has the moral authority on the immigration issue, to come forward and to cut a to come with a deal that says, of course we're going to continue to secure the border, but there could be some kind of a worker program that allows people to come here legally, and work in the United States. But I don't think anybody other than Donald Trump could probably come up and have the ability to cut a deal like that.
Yeah, right. And I view it as sort of like just a painful transition time. You know, if you've ever been out of shape for a long time and you start working out again, well, you're going to be pretty sore for a while, right? But your calculation is that your health benefits in the long run are going to be what make it all worth it. And we can't keep going the way we were going with an open border, with cartels and crime and all kinds of, Chinese nationals flooding in, Muslim terrorists undetected coming into our country, and all of that sort of thing. Do you see eye to eye on that with me?
Oh, I totally do. The worst part about, I mean, the border under the Biden administration was a complete disaster. I visited it twice, and I saw the disaster firsthand. I always talk to people when they talk about the compassion, of letting people come. I said, look, stood there on the border in McAllen, Texas, and I looked into the eyes of little girls who were sex trafficked, who were raped, who were sexually abused on their 1,000-mile journey.
Wow.
And why did that happen? Because our government told them if they came, we would let them in, and that was immoral to
Yeah.
do that. And so we got that stopped. But the real terrible nature of the border crisis under the Biden administration is the fact that for so long, we allowed the rule of law to not matter.
Amen.
And you can have laws on the books, and if you don't enforce them, then there's just no rule of law. And so it's okay if you want to repeal a law. There's a process to do that, but we never did that. We just ignored it. And if you do that for too long, you lose the rule of law. And if America loses the rule of law, really, we've lost everything.
Well, I want to say amen, hallelujah, preach it, brother. That I agree so strongly with that, Jeff. I've written some articles on it and so on, and and you see it now as the left is fighting the enforcement of our laws. What I want to say to them is, you don't agree with the law? Fine. Let your voice be heard. Get your congressman to propose a bill. Do something to change it. But you don't attack our law enforcement officers in the streets, burn down buildings, burn cars, and all this other kind of stuff. Is this a bigger problem in America today, the loss of respect for the rule of law?
Well, I think it's not only a loss of respect for the rule of law, but we have people who are using it to tear down America. I think we have enemies within, to be honest with you, who don't like our system. They either don't like capitalism, they don't like our Constitution, they don't like the country that we live in, and so they're using our freedoms and our liberties and our way of life against us to try and attack us from within. And you see that all the time. These attacks on ICE particularly are frankly despicable.
Mm-hmm.
We expect that our governments, whether they're state, local, federal, that they're all going to work together to
Right.
to advance our society, and they're going to uphold the law. And so what we see when we see this happening, what happens if there's a bank robbery in the downtown Colorado Springs today? The FBI gets called. The Federal Bureau of Investigation gets called because it's a federal crime to rob a bank because of that interstate commerce clause that we talked about earlier. What would happen if the federal government said, forget it. We don't care. We're not going to respond to
Yeah.
bank robberies anymore. The system, the rule of law, our country falls apart. Pretty soon you have bank robberies everywhere because the people who are supposed to be fixing that aren't responding. The same thing is true when we have local leaders, or leaders, I'm using the word pretty loosely, but local politicians, whether they're governors or mayors, who decide that they're not going to help the federal government enforce immigration laws. Before too long, we just lose the rule of law. Why should we continue to send cities and states that do that federal dollars. They don't deserve those dollars.
Yeah, and I saw a poll a couple weeks ago, Congressman, that I don't want to say a majority, I don't recall the specific numbers, but I think it was very close to a majority of Democrats believe that Donald Trump and Elon Musk, that it would be a good thing if they were assassinated. Also,
Horrible.
large numbers of people between 18 and 39 believe that the killing of Charlie Kirk was justified. What does that say about where we are as a country? Real quick, I've got about 2 minutes left.
Yeah. Well, Richard, I mean, what does it say about a human being who would say that? Like, to anyone who would say that or think that, you probably need to go back to the day you were born and have your parents get a do-over because they didn't raise you right. If that's what you think, that it's okay to think that another person was killed. I thought about this when Vice President Dick Cheney passed away, all the people that are going to come out and say horrible things. And I thought, when Jimmy Carter passed away, he wasn't my favorite president. I didn't agree with a lot of things that he did, but I honored him. I went to his body lying in state. I paid my respects. That's what decent human beings do. And there is a terrible scourge right now on the soul of America when it comes to people who will stand up and cheer political violence, or they think that that's right. I think part of it is connected perhaps to social media and this feeling that you can say nasty things to somebody on social media and it's okay. It's not okay. Our mothers and fathers raised us right. Follow the good book, follow the Bible,
Mhm.
say nice things, be kind to one another.
Yeah.
We can have disagreements, but be kind.
Well, thank you for that. And that's one of the things I admire about you, Congressman, is you operate in all your public statements. You're a statesman, and we're just proud to have you representing Colorado. Even though we're not in your district, we're still proud of you.
Well, Richard, I've adopted you in Teller County. I've adopted you.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you so much, sir, for joining the show today. And how can people connect with you and learn more about what's going on through your office?
Sure. Well, Richard, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You can go to crank.house.gov. That's crank.house.gov. And you can sign up for our newsletter. We send out a newsletter every 2 weeks to folks. We try not to bombard you with stuff, but it's got my floor statements and things like that. It's pretty informative. So we'd love to have you go there and learn more.
Well, and you also have services that you provide, right, like for constituents and helping them with any of their needs. And so, yeah, we encourage folks to check that out. And thanks again for coming on the show. To all of our viewers today, I want to also remind you we've got a brand new product that we want to make available to you at no charge. It's Andrew Wommack's booklet called Who Made You God? I'm going to read this one. This one sounds really great, but it really is the age-old question all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Who is God? Who's God in your life? Are you sitting on the throne, or is the Lord? Go to truthandlibertygtn.com today. Share your email with us, and we'll be happy to send this to you at no charge. And again, thank you for watching our show today. We'll see you again next time here on Truth and Liberty.